So you're into Stoicism, huh? That's awesome. We're going to do deep dive today, and we're going to look at some things that can prevent us from really, reaching our potential, even if we were really dedicated to practicing Stoicism.
Yeah. You can study the ideas all you want, but if you have certain ingrained habits, it can really hold you back.
Yeah, for sure. Like little leaks in your ship, right? Little holes.
Exactly.
So to guide us on this journey, we're going to look at what Marcus Aurelius had to say in his Meditations. He was a Roman emperor who actually practiced this stuff in his daily life. So pretty cool perspective, right?
Yeah. And what's even cooler is he wasn't writing for anyone to read. These were like his own private thoughts. So really, really honest and personal.
Yeah, that's a good point. So let's jump right in. What are some of these bad habits that every Stoic needs to watch out for?
I think one of the biggest ones has got to be procrastination, putting things off. Yeah, he talks about this right off the bat. He's like, remember how long thou hast already put off these things, and how often a certain day and hour, as it were, having been set unto thee by the gods, thou hast neglected it.
It's so easy to say, oh yeah, I'll start meditating tomorrow, or next time I'll be more patient. But that's the trap, isn't it?
It is.
Because as Aurelius points out, man can part with no life properly, save with that little part of life which he now lives.
Right. Like you only have now. You can't live in tomorrow.
And every moment that we delay is a moment lost forever.
And it's not just about delaying tasks. It's about delaying, growing as a person, developing your virtue. And we really only have control in this moment. So when we put off dealing with these things, with the distempers of the soul, as he calls them, we just make them harder to overcome later.
They say, oh yeah, I'll work on my anger later.
No.
Now is the time. Now is always the time.
Right.
Okay, so procrastination is a big one. Another thing I think a lot of people struggle with is, focusing too much on what other people are doing or saying or thinking.
Yeah, Aurelius was onto that too. Big time. He said, spend not the remnant of thy days in thoughts and fancies concerning other men, when it is not in relation to some common good. He saw this as, just a waste of time and energy that could be used on yourself.
It's so true. I mean, how often do we spend time scrolling through social media, comparing ourselves to others, or dissecting, what someone said at work.
Right.
But all of that is outside of our control. What really matters is what we do and what we think. And if we're busy focusing on everyone else, we lose sight of that.
Yeah. And Aurelius has a really interesting point. He says that praise and honor should really only matter if they're coming from people who are actually living good lives themselves.
Interesting. So if someone who's, not living a virtuous life criticizes you,
yeah,
then it doesn't really matter.
Yeah, like what do they know? They don't even have their own house in order. What matters is that you're living up to your own standards, to the standards of virtue.
Makes sense. So this kind of leads into another habit, which is being too attached to indifferent things, like wealth, health, reputation, those kinds of things. The Stoics have this concept of adiaphora, things that are outside of our control and shouldn't really affect our happiness.
And Aurelius was very much aware of this. He's constantly reminding himself and us that these things are temporary. They change. They can be taken away from us. He says, consider how quickly all things are dissolved and resolved.
Like trying to hold on to sand.
Exactly. You can't. So when we get too attached to these things, we set ourselves up for disappointment, anxiety, and suffering.
And that desire for external validation, wanting everyone to like us or to approve of what we're doing, that just leads to misery too, right?
Absolutely. Aurelius talks about the inconstancy and variableness of human judgments and opinions. People are fickle.
Yeah, they are.
Their opinions change all the time. So why would you base your sense of self-worth on something so unstable? As a Stoic, your value comes from within, from your commitment to virtue, to living a good life.
That's powerful. Okay, let's shift gears a little bit and talk about dealing with difficult people. Because let's be honest, we all encounter them.
Oh, yeah.
So how do we avoid getting angry and bitter when someone's really pushing our buttons?
Well, Aurelius had to deal with a lot of difficult people. As emperor, I'm sure he had his fair share.
Probably a lot more than his fair share.
Right. He talks about meeting people who are, lazy, ungrateful, rude, deceitful, envious, unsociable, the whole gamut.
Okay.
But he says, mentally prepare yourself for these encounters. Like before you even start your day, think about the fact that you're probably going to run into some difficult people.
That's interesting. Almost like a preemptive strike against anger.
Exactly. By anticipating it, you can choose how to react instead of just getting swept up in the emotion.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
And Aurelius had a really profound insight into the nature of these difficult people. He recognized that a lot of the time they're just ignorant. They're not acting out of malice, but out of a lack of understanding of what's truly good and bad.
So it's like they're hurting others because they don't even know any better.
Right. And this is where the Stoic idea of our shared humanity comes in. Aurelius reminds himself that even the person who's wronging him is still his kinsman. They're connected by reason, by this divine spark that's in all of us.
That's a really powerful way to look at it.
It is. And it makes anger seem kind of ridiculous. Why would you be angry at a part of yourself? Or at someone who's essentially a teammate in the game of life?
So instead of getting angry, we should try to understand them, to maybe even help them see a better way.
Exactly. That's the Stoic ideal.
All right, moving on. Another habit that can really drag us down is complaining and focusing on misfortune, dwelling on the negative.
Yeah, Aurelius talks about this a lot. He believed that complaining kind of isolates us, makes us feel like victims. And that goes against the Stoic idea of interconnectedness. We're all part of this larger web of life.
Right. And when we complain, we're basically saying, this shouldn't be happening. We're resisting the natural order of things.
Exactly. And as Aurelius reminds us, we should accept what we can't control. What happens is either part of nature or it's part of some larger plan.
And a lot of times, our own opinions about what's happening are what cause us the most trouble. It's not the events themselves, but our judgments about them.
Right. So instead of focusing on what's going wrong, a Stoic tries to see the good in every situation, or at least to focus on what they can control, what they can learn from the experience.
Okay, let's talk about one more habit. This one might be a bit more subtle, and it has to do with neglecting our inner lives, not taking the time for self-reflection.
Aurelius was a huge advocate for this. He constantly emphasized the importance of turning inward. He says, "At what time soever thou wilt, it is in thy power to retire into thyself, and to be at rest and free from all businesses." He saw our souls as this inner sanctuary where we can find peace and clarity.
I love that. It's like we have this inner compass, but we forget to check it. We get so busy with the external world that we lose touch with what's going on inside.
Right. And that's how these bad habits creep in. If we're not aware of them, we can't fix them. Aurelius believed that we should cultivate a decent, orderly disposition and carriage, free from all confusion and tumultuousness within ourselves.
And that only comes through self-reflection, through taking the time to really examine our thoughts and our motivation.
Exactly.
Okay, last but not least, there's this idea of mistaking Stoic indifference for inaction. Sometimes people think that being a Stoic means you just sit back and let things happen to you.
Yeah, that's a huge misconception. Stoicism isn't about passivity. It's about choosing your actions carefully and then accepting the outcome, whatever it may be. Aurelius says, "Let nothing be done rashly and at random, but all things according to the most exact and perfect rules of art."
So it's about acting with skill, with reason, with virtue, but not getting attached to a specific result.
Right, because ultimately we can't control the outcome. All we can control is our own actions, and that's where our focus should be.
So we've covered a lot of ground here. We've talked about procrastination, focusing on others, attachment to indifferent things, anger, complaining, neglecting self-reflection, and confusing indifference with inaction. All of these things can really hold us back from living a truly Stoic life.
And the key takeaway here is that we have to be vigilant. We have to constantly be aware of these tendencies and actively work to counteract them.
I know I've definitely caught myself slipping up in some of these areas. And just hearing you talk about it has been really helpful for me. I imagine our listeners are feeling the same way.
I hope so. And, the first step is awareness. So if you've recognized some of these habits in yourself, that's great. That means you're already on the path to overcoming them.
Exactly. And as Aurelius shows us, it's a lifelong process. Stoicism is about continuous self-improvement. It's about always striving to live in accordance with reason.
Absolutely.
So as you go about your day, think about this. Are there any other habits, even seemingly small ones, that might be holding you back? It's a question worth asking ourselves regularly.
It is. And if you're looking for more guidance on this journey, I highly recommend checking out Meditations. It's full of wisdom that's just as relevant today as it was centuries ago. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
Absolutely. Thanks for listening, everyone.